A galaxy teeming with life. Trillions of beings spread across the stars, each with their own histories, their own ambitions, their own civilizations. Some were ancient and wise, having witnessed the rise and fall of empires over millennia. Others were young and ambitious, reaching out into the void for the first time, eager to carve their place in the cosmos. Trade routes stretched between worlds. Alliances and rivalries shaped the fate of entire star systems, and technological marvels transformed planets into utopias, or battlegrounds. But in the end, none of it mattered. Every city, every colony, every life form vanished. Not in an instant, not in the blink of an eye, but in a slow, merciless unraveling of reality itself. A single event, a single act of desperation, destroyed not just a civilization, not just a species, but the very foundation of the galaxy itself. A war crime so monstrous that it did not just rewrite history, it erased it. And yet, it began with something so simple. A choice. A decision made in the depths of war, where reason gives way to fear and morality is crushed under the weight of survival. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. No bomb, no fleet, no invading army. It was something far worse. But to understand how it happened, to grasp the magnitude of what was lost, we must first go back to the war itself. Because this was not a war fought over resources or territory. It was not a war of conquest or revenge. This was a war for the very right to exist. The two great powers of the galaxy had been on a collision course for centuries. The dominion of Orion, a technologically superior empire that prided itself on precision, efficiency, and absolute control. Their mastery of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biological augmentation had made them the undisputed rulers of the galactic core. To them, the future was clear. Order, discipline, and logic would shape the destiny of the stars. And then, there was their enemy, the coalition of free worlds. A vast, sprawling alliance of independent species, each with their own cultures, philosophies, and agendas. Unlike the Dominion, they thrived on diversity, on adaptability, on chaos. They did not seek conquest, but they refused to bow to the Dominion's rule. And so, for centuries, they existed in uneasy tension, trading when it suited them, fighting when they had to, but never daring to unleash a full-scale war, until the discovery. On an unremarkable world, orbiting a dying star, an ancient ruin was uncovered. Not just any ruin, but the last remnants of a civilization so old that even the Dominion's vast archives held no records of them. Their technology was beyond comprehension, their knowledge buried beneath the sands of time. And among the artifacts left behind, there was one that should have never been found, the Oblivion Engine. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. No missile, no energy beam, no superweapon that could be aimed at an enemy fleet. It was something different, something that changed reality itself. The few records that remained warned of its power, of the catastrophe that had befallen those who had used it before. The very civilization that built it had vanished so completely that even their ruins were dust. It was a device that could not just destroy, but erase. Not just kill, but unmake. The coalition believed it was too dangerous to exist. They sought to lock it away, to bury it in the void where no one could ever reach it again. But the Dominion, they saw it as the ultimate weapon, a way to end the war before it ever truly began. And so, the war ignited. It was not a swift war. It was not a war of honor or strategy. It was a war of desperation, of survival, of madness. The Dominion struck first, using their superior technology to crush entire worlds before the coalition could react. Their fleets, powered by sentient AI and enhanced warriors, seemed unstoppable. The coalition suffered devastating losses in the early years, entire planets lost before they even had a chance to defend themselves. But the coalition was not weak. They learned, they adapted, they fought back with everything they had. And slowly, the balance of power began to shift. The war raged for decades, leaving scars across the galaxy. Entire civilizations, once thriving, were reduced to cinders. The Dominion, once arrogant in their superiority, now found themselves facing annihilation. Their fleets, once unmatched, were now outnumbered. Their strongholds, once impenetrable, were now under siege. And that was when they made the choice. Faced with the collapse of their empire, with no path to victory, the leaders of the Dominion gathered in secret. Their greatest minds, their most ruthless strategists, their most desperate warlords, all in a single room, making a decision that would decide the fate of the galaxy. They would activate the Oblivion Engine. They had no idea what would happen. No one did. The warnings were ancient, fragmented, incomplete. But they knew one thing. If they were to fall, then so would their enemies. And so, with trembling hands, they activated the device. What happened next defied explanation. The moment the Oblivion Engine was activated, the fabric of space trembled. It was not an explosion, not a wave of destruction, but something far more insidious, something that even the most advanced minds in the Dominion could not comprehend. The device had no control panel, no targeting system, no discernible interface. It was not meant to be used as a weapon of war. It was something older, something that should never have been disturbed. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Dominion's warlords stood in eerie silence, waiting for the so-called ultimate weapon to unleash its wrath upon their enemies. Some expected an unstoppable force to obliterate the coalition fleets in an instant. Others believed the engine would generate a field of destruction so vast that entire star systems would collapse. But the truth was far worse than anything they could have imagined. The change was subtle at first. A strange vibration rippled through the Dominion's warships, causing systems to flicker erratically. The AI cores that controlled their fleets stuttered, their once flawless algorithms collapsing into meaningless loops of data. Across the Dominion's territories, scientists and engineers scrambled to understand what was happening, but there were no answers, only confusion, only dread. Then, the stars began to vanish. Not in the way a dying star collapses into a black hole, not in the way a nebula fades over eons. The stars were simply gone. In their place, there was nothing. No light, no gravity, no remnants of their existence, as if they had never been there at all. At first, the Dominion believed it was a side effect of the engine's activation, perhaps a temporary spatial distortion, something that could be reversed. But then, the reports started pouring in from across the galaxy. Not just stars, but planets, moons, entire solar systems were disappearing. Civilizations that had stood for millennia, species that had survived countless wars and catastrophes, one by one, they were being erased. It did not happen instantly. The Oblivion Engine worked like an unraveling thread, pulling at the very fabric of reality itself. It started at the heart of the Dominion's empire, but soon, it spread outward. Worlds that had once been bastions of power and knowledge simply ceased to be. One moment they were there, teeming with life, with bustling cities, with histories stretching back untold ages. And the next, there was nothing. No ruins, no debris, not even the lingering echoes of their existence in the void. The Coalition, at first, had no idea what was happening. Their fleets, poised to deliver the final blow to the Dominion, found themselves facing an enemy that was simply disappearing. Entire armadas were vanishing mid-battle, their ships dissolving into the darkness as though they had never been built. The Coalition's generals believed at first that the Dominion was using some kind of last-ditch cloaking technology, some form of experimental teleportation. But then, their own worlds began to vanish. Panic spread like wildfire. Messages were sent across the stars, desperate pleas for answers, for explanations, for help. But there was no help to give. Those who tried to flee found that the destruction followed them. Those who tried to fight back realized there was nothing to fight. The Oblivion Engine did not kill, it did not conquer, it simply unmade, and then, the real horror set in. Historians, scientists, scholars, anyone who had access to the galactic archives, began to notice something far more disturbing than the physical destruction of worlds. It was not just that planets and civilizations were disappearing. It was that all records of them were vanishing too. Databases that once held millennia of history were now filled with blank entries. Star maps that had guided travelers for generations were now riddled with empty spaces, their once charted paths leading to nothingness. The names of entire species, once spoken with reverence or fear, now meant nothing. People began forgetting. At first, it was only small details, minor inconsistencies, odd gaps in knowledge. But soon, the memories themselves were unraveling, as though the very concept of those civilizations had never existed. A scientist on one of the last remaining research stations desperately tried to record everything before it was lost. He spoke into a hollow recorder, his voice frantic, his hands trembling as he watched the stars outside the viewport blink out one by one. This isn't destruction. This isn't war. This is erasure. We are being erased, not just from existence, but from memory. The universe itself is forgetting us. His words, like so many others, were never heard. The station vanished before he could finish. The few survivors that remained, scattered across the void in failing ships and isolated bunkers, were left with nothing but madness. Some tried to piece together what had happened, but the more they searched for answers, the less they could remember. Others simply stared into the endless blackness, realizing that there was no escape, no salvation, no future. And then, the last light of the galaxy flickered out. There was no explosion, no final scream, no dramatic climax, just silence. An empty void where once there had been billions of lives, countless dreams, and entire histories. No ruins remained, no trace of what had once been. The Great War, the Dominion, the Coalition, all of it was gone. But the worst part, there was no one left to even remember it had ever happened. At the heart of the devastation was a single, undeniable truth. The Oblivion engine did not simply destroy the galaxy. It erased it. The concept of destruction implies remnants, echoes of what once was, but this was different. This was pure annihilation at the fundamental level of reality itself. Every atom, every memory, every recorded thought was being unmade. Those who initially survived had only one certainty. There was nowhere to run. Escape was impossible, not because of any blockade or military pursuit, but because the very laws of existence were crumbling beneath their feet. Space itself twisted in unnatural ways, erasing escape routes, distorting time, rewriting reality. Ships that attempted to flee found themselves lost in an abyss where physics no longer applied. Some survivors, drifting in the remnants of what used to be star systems, reported seeing their own ships arriving before they had even departed, as if time had folded in on itself. Others found themselves trapped in loops of existence, experiencing the same few moments over and over again, until even those moments were erased. And then, an even more terrifying realization struck. The nature of the Oblivion engine's effect was not uniform. It did not erase everything at once. The process was selective, creeping, insidious. Some planets disappeared instantly. Others decayed in strange, surreal ways. Entire cities turning to dust while the people still lived, unaware that their world was already gone. Some civilizations had their past rewritten in real time, their history changing moment by moment until they became something unrecognizable, and then nothing at all. The more advanced a civilization was, the faster it seemed to disappear. The Dominion's own capital was one of the first to be erased, while more primitive, lesser-known worlds lingered longer, as if reality itself was unsure of what to do with them. Some survivors speculated that the very act of being remembered was what sealed a world's fate. If a civilization had left a mark on the galaxy, through history, warfare, technology, it was erased first, as if the engine sought to remove anything significant, anything that had influenced the cosmos. This meant that as the great empires and mighty armadas vanished, a few small, forgotten pockets of life still remained, clinging to existence in the ruins of a galaxy that had already ceased to be. One such group consisted of the last remnants of a lost world. Simple farmers, nomads who had never set foot on another planet, never seen a hyperdrive, never even known the names of the great empires that had once ruled the galaxy. To them, nothing seemed amiss at first. Their stars still shone, their crops still grew. But soon they began to notice strange things. Their elders told stories of ancestors who had once spoken of gods in the sky. Gods who had left behind ancient ruins and machines that no one understood. But now, those ruins were gone. Their legends, once told with conviction, had holes in them, gaps where names and places should have been. And then, the stars in their sky started vanishing. At first, only a few elders noticed. They tried to recall constellations they had memorized since childhood. But the patterns no longer made sense. Some called it the work of spirits. Others believed it was punishment from forgotten deities. But soon, the changes could not be ignored. Entire villages woke up to a sky with fewer stars than the night before. The heavens were shrinking, collapsing inwards, as if the universe itself was folding away into nothingness. Panic took hold. Some of the villagers tried to record what was happening, carving symbols into stone, etching memories into whatever they could find. But their own minds betrayed them. As they worked, they forgot what they were recording. They would look at the carvings a moment later and see only meaningless scratches, marks that had no significance. And then, they too began to vanish. One by one, without sound, without struggle, they simply ceased to be. Entire families, entire generations, gone. The last survivor of the village, a young girl who had spent her life watching the stars, stood alone beneath a sky that had become completely black. She looked up, trying to remember the constellations her father had once taught her. But she could no longer recall his face, or his voice, or his name. The next moment, she was gone too. And just like that, the last fragment of civilization, one that had never even known of the war, never known of the Dominion, never even heard of the Oblivion Engine, was erased. But if everything was erased, if every world, every person, every trace of history was removed, what was left? At the center of the void, where the Dominion's capital once stood, where the war had once raged, where the final desperate act of hubris had unleashed the end of everything, something remained. The Oblivion Engine was still there, silent, unmoving. It had done what it was designed to do, but who or what had designed it? The truth was lost to the abyss. There was no one left to remember, no one left to question. The universe had been erased, and the only thing left in its place was the machine that had erased it. A machine that was now completely, utterly alone. The final survivors did not comprehend the full horror of what had happened. How could they? To understand the end of everything was to stand at the edge of reason itself, to gaze into an abyss so vast that even thought itself became meaningless. The Oblivion Engine had not just destroyed the galaxy, it had rewritten the very rules of existence, tearing apart the fabric of reality in ways no living being could truly comprehend. The laws of physics were no longer constants but suggestions, concepts that flickered in and out of meaning as the last remnants of the universe collapsed in upon themselves. Some of the few who remained were those trapped in isolated ships, far from the center of the destruction, clinging to the last vestiges of normal space. Their instruments had long since failed, their sensors unable to detect anything beyond the swirling void where the galaxy had once been. For some, the slow decay of existence was an agonizing process, one they could perceive only in flashes, of impossible distortions, time itself fractured, dragging them across moments that no longer aligned. 1 second, they were staring at the silent abyss, and the next, they were reliving past memories that twisted in unnatural ways. Faces of loved ones they could no longer name, voices speaking words that never existed, memories changing even, as they were recalled. For others, the end was not slow, but abrupt and absolute. There were reports, if they could even be called that, of entire starships suddenly ceasing to exist, not with an explosion, not with a collapse, but with nothing. One moment they were there, and the next they had never been. The universe did not acknowledge their absence, for it had no record of them ever being real. And yet, something remained. A drifting colony ship, one of the last human vessels to have survived the war, had managed to escape the worst of the destruction, if such a thing could be called survival. It had left the Dominion's capital system just before the Oblivion Engine was activated, seeking refuge in the outer edges of the galaxy, far beyond the known trade routes and hyperlanes. But now, as they looked back toward where they had come from, there was nothing. Their navigation charts were useless. Every known landmark, every star, every point of reference they had ever used was gone. where a spiraling galaxy of trillions of stars had once stretched across the void, there was now only emptiness. No planets, no nebulae, no cosmic radiation. Not even the faint, distant glow of stars too far to see with the naked eye. Nothing. But then the whispers began. At first, they thought it was just the crew succumbing to stress, their minds fraying under the weight of what they had witnessed. But as the days stretched on, the voices did not fade. In the silent corridors of the ship, deep in the artificial night of the control decks, the crew heard them. Whispers from the void. They were not radio signals. They were not echoes of the past. These were voices that had no source, words that had no language, sounds that should not exist. And they were growing louder. One by one, crew members began reporting nightmares. Visions of places that had never existed, of landscapes untouched by time, of worlds that should have been real, but had never been. Some claimed they saw glimpses of a different universe, one that had been buried beneath the fabric of their own. A universe that had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the void to consume what had once been so that something new could take its place. Was this what the Oblivion engine had been designed for? Had it truly been a weapon? Or had it been something else entirely? And then, something looked back. It was not a shape, nor a shadow, nor even a presence in the way living beings understood. It was an absence given thought, an intelligence that had no name, no face, no form. But it was aware. And it was watching them. The last human survivors had unknowingly drifted too close to the threshold of what remained. A place where reality had begun to tear apart completely, where the rules of existence had crumbled entirely. And beyond that threshold, in the place where their galaxy had once been, something had woken up. It had not been there before, but now it was. The last survivors aboard the drifting colony ship no longer had the luxury of denial. Something had taken notice of them, and the terrifying part was, it had never needed to move, never needed to reach out. It had always been there, waiting, watching, existing in a place that was neither space nor time. And now that the galaxy was gone, it had room to spread. The crew tried to maintain some semblance of order. They ran every diagnostic, checked their instruments, recalibrated their scanners, anything to ground themselves in reality. But the data no longer made sense. Their sensors picked up nothing. No radiation, no gravitational waves, no cosmic background noise, just an unbroken silence that should not have been possible. And yet, they were hearing things. It started as whispers, barely audible over the ship's life support hum. But soon, it grew clearer, sharper, more insistent. Not just murmurs, but voices, speaking in perfect, articulate phrases. They came from the radio, from the ship's intercom, from the very air itself. Some were familiar, mimicking the voices of crewmates, long-dead loved ones, even past transmissions that had no way of being played back. Others were not. They were wrong. These voices did not belong to humans. They spoke in tones that sounded close to words, but twisted in ways that defied comprehension. Some phrases were understandable for a brief moment before collapsing into meaningless noise, as if the language itself were being rewritten in real time. The ship's captain, a hardened veteran who had seen entire worlds burn, ordered a full lockdown. All comms shut down, all external sensors disabled. If they were being watched, if they were being studied, he would give them nothing. It changed nothing. The messages did not stop. They only became more personal. Crew members started hearing their own voices speaking back to them, repeating their own thoughts before they had even spoken them. Conversations that had not yet happened were being played in perfect clarity, sometimes predicting arguments, orders, pleas for help that had yet to be uttered. And then the ship moved. Not by thrusters, not by any external force. One moment, they were drifting at sublight speed. The next, they were somewhere else. They hadn't engaged the engines. They hadn't activated the hyperdrive. And yet, the star patterns outside their windows had shifted, reconfiguring into formations that made no sense. They were no longer in familiar space. The navigation systems failed to map their new location. In fact, the systems refused to acknowledge they were anywhere at all. The ship's main computer showed a completely blank display where the star charts should have been. An absolute, featureless void, as though they had been transported beyond the observable universe itself. And that was when the first crew member disappeared. No warning, no sound, no sign of struggle. One moment he was there, running an analysis on the ship's reactor, and the next, he was gone. His tools were left where he had been standing. His suit remained sealed, but he simply wasn't there anymore. The security footage played back a blank space where he had been standing. There was no cut in the feed, no glitch. It was as if the universe itself had simply decided he was no longer real. Then another vanished. And another. Within hours, nearly a quarter of the crew was gone. There was no pattern, no logic to the disappearances. Engineers, scientists, pilots, even a sleeping officer in his quarters, all erased as if they had never existed. Panic set in. The remaining survivors armed themselves with whatever they could find. Guns were useless. Weapons designed to cut through hulls meant nothing against an enemy that did not physically exist. And then, the doors started leading to the wrong places. A hallway that once led to the mess hall now opened into the reactor room. A stairwell that should have led to the cargo bay instead deposited people into the bridge. The ship's layout was changing, shifting in ways that defied engineering, as if the ship itself no longer understood what it was supposed to be, or worse. Something else was deciding what it should become. And still, the voices remained. The captain, desperate to understand, ordered the one thing no one wanted to do: open a direct transmission to whatever was out there. And it answered. At first, it was a soft sound, a vibration through the ship's hull, like the echo of a heartbeat from something enormous. Then, words, spoken not through speakers, not through the radio, but as though they were being directly placed into the minds of every single survivor. At once. You should not be here. The voice did not sound angry, nor curious, nor cruel. It simply was. The captain, holding on to the last threads of his sanity, demanded to know what had happened. Who, or what, had erased the galaxy? And the voice, impossibly vast and unknowable, gave a simple response. Your war ended. The balance was broken. The wound was made. We filled the absence. The crew did not understand. But then came the final words. Words that should not have been possible, that should not have made sense, yet filled every survivor with a dread so absolute that they knew they had never been meant to hear them. You think your kind was the first? The universe, as they knew it, was never the beginning. The weight of those words pressed down on the remaining crew like the force of a collapsing star. You think your kind was the first? Something about the phrasing was fundamentally wrong, like a question that was not meant to be asked, let alone answered. It wasn't just the statement itself that sent a tremor through their minds, it was the implication. Humanity had always assumed that if they were not the first civilization in the universe, they were at least among the few that had achieved true galactic expansion. But this entity, whatever it was, had spoken with the certainty of something ancient, something that had seen cycles upon cycles of existence before them. What had come before, and more importantly, what had happened to them? The captain, his voice barely steady, demanded to know. But the answer did not come in words. It came in visions. The crew screamed as their minds were forced open, as if an unseen hand had reached inside them and rewrote the meaning of existence itself. They saw worlds, not as they were, but as they had once been. Planets teeming with life, civilizations rising and falling like waves upon the cosmic shore. Some were familiar, distant species humanity had once called allies or enemies in the galactic wars. But others were unrecognizable, towering beings of liquid metal stretching their tendrils across entire star systems. Cities built into the shells of megafauna the size of moons, their inhabitants living symbiotically with creatures older than the stars. Civilizations that communicated not through speech, not through sound, but through the bending of reality itself. And yet, every single one of them was gone. One by one, they had disappeared, their empires erased. Not by war, not by plague, but by the same silence that had swallowed the galaxy whole. Because each had committed the same crime, each had grown too vast, too reckless, too destructive, and each, in their own way, had broken something. Humanity had been the latest, but not the first. The wars they had waged, the weapons they had unleashed, none of it was new. The atrocity that had shattered reality, it had happened before, countless times, and each time, the same force had come to erase what remained. You burned too brightly, you spread too fast, you opened doors you do not understand, and each time, you force our hand. The crew felt their own memories twisting, unraveling, rewriting themselves, as if the entity's mere presence was fracturing their own sense of existence. They saw the war again, the last war humanity had fought. They saw the bomb, the unspeakable weapon that had ended it, but this time, they saw what had happened after. The bomb had not just annihilated planets, it had ripped through time itself, severing the threads of cause and effect. It had created a wound in reality so vast that the very concept of existence had begun to unravel, and that wound had called something in. It is not destruction, it is balance. The entity did not hate them. It did not feel anger, nor mercy. It simply existed to correct what had been broken, to erase the damage, to make the universe whole again. By removing them, you are the last. The words rang like a funeral bell in their minds. They realized, with a horror too vast to comprehend, that they were not being spoken to as individuals, not as a crew, not even as a species. They were being spoken to as the last remnants of an entire existence. Humanity was gone. The entire galaxy. Gone. The silence that followed was heavier than any battlefield, thicker than the vacuum of space itself. It pressed down on the remaining crew, suffocating them with a presence that was not truly there. An absence so vast, it was almost a presence in itself. They were alone. And yet, they were not. The voice had spoken without sound, without form, without anything the human mind could truly comprehend. And now, it was showing them everything. Not in images, not in words, but in raw understanding, flooding their consciousness like an ocean breaking through a shattered dam. There had been others. That was the first truth that became undeniable. Humanity had not been the first to reach beyond their world, to claim the stars, to wage wars in the black abyss between planets. They had not been the first to see themselves as conquerors of the cosmos, nor the first to believe they had the right to shape it to their will. They had not been the first. But now, they were the last. What they had called progress, what they had called expansion, what they had celebrated as their inevitable march toward dominance. Others had done the same. Across countless eons, civilizations had risen, each believing themselves to be the pinnacle of existence. Some had been monstrous in form, beings of shifting matter and sentient energy, living for millennia in bodies that defied all logic. Others had been bound to flesh, limited by gravity and atmosphere, much like humans had been before they shattered their chains. But in the end, it had never mattered. The pattern had always been the same. Growth, conflict, war, destruction. This entity, if it could even be called that, had been there for all of it. It did not interfere. It did not warn. It did not care, in the way that humans understood caring. It only acted when the line was crossed, when a civilization overstepped, when their hunger for power and expansion became too great, too reckless. It was never the first war, never the first atrocity, never the first weapon that shattered entire worlds. It was always something deeper, something that broke not just planets, but the delicate structure of reality itself. Humanity had thought they had won. They had thought they had ended the war. But they had not just ended their enemies. They had ended everything. The weapon had been meant to break a world, to silence an empire in a single strike. But it had done something worse. It had cut, not through matter, not through flesh, but through the fabric of existence itself. A wound that did not heal, a fracture that spread, unseen at first, but growing with every moment. A break in reality where the rules of time, space, and causality no longer applied. And something had noticed. The entity did not see destruction as humans did. It did not see war or conquest or even genocide. It saw imbalance. A disruption in the cosmic order, one that could not be ignored. It had happened before. It had been corrected before. And now, it was happening again. The crew could feel it now, a presence seeping into them, around them, through them. It was not physical. It was not even truly alive, not in the way they were. It did not kill. It did not destroy. It simply erased. It unmade. The captain screamed something, a command, a plea, a prayer, but the words dissolved before they could even reach his lips. The sound did not carry, not because of silence, but because the very concept of speech was breaking apart in the wake of the entity's will. One by one, the crew felt themselves slipping, not dying, not fading, just being forgotten. Their memories unraveled first. Not just their own, but those of the universe around them. The stars they had seen, the battles they had fought, the people they had loved. Gone, as if they had never been. The history of humanity itself was collapsing, the stories and struggles of their kind vanishing into nothingness. They looked at one another, desperate, pleading for something, anything to hold on to. But even that was stolen from them. One blink, a crew of 20. Another blink, a crew of 6. A breath. A single man standing alone in a ship that had never existed. And then, not even that. The last thought that flickered through the void was not of fear nor regret. It was not of war or power or all the mistakes that had been made. It was a question. One final, desperate question. Had any of them ever been real at all? The silence answered. And then, there was nothing. The galaxy was whole again,